What should we expect from China with that perspective? Michael HIRSON joins us. He was the former U.S. Treasury point person in Beijing and now heads the China division of the Eurasia Group out of New York City. Michael, what do you think Chinese officials view this as? We've seen retaliation. We've seen them detain Canadian citizens. Why is China reacting this way?
I think from the perspective of Beijing, they're in a difficult political balancing act. Clearly, the arrest of this leading business executive, the daughter of the founder of Huawei, who is a household name in China, a business icon, is arousing significant nationalist sentiment in China. At the same time, you've got a fragile truce between President Xi Jinping and President Trump. And what we've seen in recent days is the Chinese side really make efforts to keep this truce going despite the arrest of Ms. Meng from Huawei. And so essentially Canada is caught in the middle. China is venting by retaliating against Canada because it feels like from a strategic point of view there are limits to what it can do directly against the United States.
So the Chinese government knows it's not really the Canadian government behind this, but that's the easy target.
I think that's right. I think there's also a sense of real frustration on the part of Beijing that Canada would be willing to honor this request from the U.S. And I think there's a broader issue here that China faces, which is that I think the Chinese have been quite surprised at the willingness of U.S. allies to stand by the U.S. on some of these really intense geopolitical issues between the U.S. and China in the last year or so. In other words, China thought that there would be more of an opening to sort of hive off U.S. allies from the United States because of the frustration in these countries with President Trump's policies. But what you find is that many of these allies, including Canada, are not so quick to to downplay their relationship with the U.S., and many of them share these concerns, national security concerns about aspects of Huawei and China's foreign policy.
So Donald Trump came out earlier this week and said basically perhaps this could be a bargaining chip in the trade deal and that maybe the Huawei executive could be released if China could come to an agreement with the U.S. Should the American president be providing more public support to Canada on this?
Yes, I think he should, and politicizing this creates some real awkwardness for the Canadian side. Because here you have Canada saying, look, this was an issue of rule of law, of an independent judiciary and law enforcement system, honoring a request from the United States, and then the president politicizes it, which implies really maybe this is not so much about rule of law, and this is really about a political quid pro quo between the U.S. and China. So I think it's very awkward for the Canadian side, but it also creates some political risks for Trump at home. We've seen President Trump prioritize trade deals with China over some of the national security concerns that are bubbling up. And there is very broad political support in the U.S. for addressing these national security concerns. So you've already seen U.S. officials, members of Congress come out and say, no, this is not a bargaining chip. And so I think President Trump is going to have to be careful in terms of the degree to which he politicizes this, because he will face blowback at home.
Michael, what should Canadian officials be prepared for in terms of further retaliation, and how do you see this playing out?
It will depend clearly on what happens over the next few weeks. The fact that Ms. Meng has received bail in Canada, I think, helps lower the temperature at least a little bit. There's also the possibility that if she is extradited to the U.S., clearly that will displease China, but it might also shift some of the focus of this back onto the United States from Canada.
Michael, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.